Hi, this is Cindy Pope. I'm happy to be here at the Cool Tools studio. I'm going to show you how to roll clay, and I'm going to show you first the products that you need to successfully roll clay. It's really important for the Curio to have nice, thin, even clay. Cool Tools has been kind enough to create some rolling frames for us for the Curio, and they're also producing a silicone mat, which is my favorite surface to roll on. You want to roll on top of a very hard surface. I often use a tile. If you have like a granite countertop, that'll also work. You need a tissue blade and a ruler and the wonderful new nonstick roller, which I love. A little olive oil and a little distilled water. Olive oil is the only additive you want to use. And then a caliper. You don't need a caliper, but I like to measure the thickness occasionally to make sure I'm getting close. You can also use the frames to measure the thickness, because if you put your clay up next to the frame and the frame is 3 cards, obviously that'll work for you. And then you need either FS 999 or Easy 960 Sterling or one of Hadar's One Fire Flex clays. For the most part, that's what I recommend. You can use some other clays, but these are really going to work well. So what we're looking for when we're rolling clay is we're looking for a nice flexible sheet. This is a 3-card sheet that we're going to use in cutting the earrings. And this is 1.5 cards. And you can see at 1.5 cards, which is about the thickness that a metalsmith would use for bezels, you're getting a beautiful flexibility that's almost as flexible as paper type. I would say as flexible, without the negative of when you add water, it disintegrating. So FS 999 is a great choice for that. You can also do your bezels and all these projects with Easy 960. Now I'm going to show you exactly how to roll the clay using the tools that we demonstrated earlier. I need a rolling pin and my form and my silicone mat, and I'm going to use some olive oil. That's the only additive I use. And I want to show you that when you use olive oil, you want to use very little because it saturates the clay. And with the Curio, we reconstitute over and over again. So you're going to see how I use the least amount of oil that I can. And what I do is I either put it here or I put it on my skin. And then I take a little bit and I roll it where I'm going to roll the clay. The bigger your clay, the more oil you want to have on there. I will tell you, I think these hold a little bit of oil in them, so you probably need to add less as you use them, even though you wash them. So now I've got it on there. I'm going to go with 3 cards, and I'm going to use FS 999. I've got a 25-gram package. I want to tell you, when you roll, you always need to have about twice as much clay as you're going to end up with, because we're trying to make a certain size. And it's much easier to roll with more clay. So for a 25-gram sheet, I'll be using 50 grams usually. This one is not quite that big. So I'm going to massage it a little bit. If I see any cracking or anything, usually this is probably good, but occasionally I do what Lizelle Crawley does, which is condition my clay. You see when she rolls her wonderful snakes, she conditions her clay over and over again. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that distilled water, and it's a mister. I'm going to mist it and just roll. The reason I roll within saran wrap is I don't want to get the oils from my hands in the clay. If with clays, if they've been sitting around for a while, you can spritz when you've rolled it thin and then jelly roll it up. Then it's not going to be on the outside, but it's going to be dispersed in the inside as you roll. It's a great trick for all your clay rolling. So now I've got it beautifully conditioned. I'm going to put that saran wrap aside. And I'm going to just make sure it's nice and flat. And if I'm rolling in a square shape, I want it to be in a square. I'm going to compress it to make sure there's no air bubbles, but I'm always going a lot thicker than my card width. So rolling it down is also going to remove air bubbles. I'm going to put a little bit of this oil on my roller because you don't want the clay to stick to your roller. And this is why you really want the nonstick roller. we're going fairly thin and you don't want it sticking. And you can either pick it up and move it or turn it because, again, as Lizelle said in her video, as you roll it both ways, it's going to shrink in a more consistent manner. So you want to be sure as you're pressing it down and flattening it out that you're rolling both ways. And at this point, I'm going to take my tissue blade and I'm going to even this square up. I'm going to cut all those extra parts off. I am using a square for this. If you're using a circle, you can just use circle cutters, a little bit larger than the piece you're going to make. If you're making lentils, that's what I do with silver, because I don't want as much extra to reconstitute. So at this point, I'm going to measure this because I want to make sure it's as big as I need it to be. I'm looking for about 2 inches by 2.5 inches for those earrings. And this one's actually 2.5 by 2.5. I don't find this clay shrinks a whole lot as it dries. Maybe a little bit, so make it slightly larger, but you always need to go back and re-roll. Here's the reason. A lot of us don't have a lot of upper body strength and we haven't rolled quite as hard as we should. So you need to really put your weight into it and you'll see it's stretched out a little bit. These rolling frames actually, I've not had as big an issue with it stretching after I cut it, but you always want to go back because we want it to be truly 3 cards. If it's not 3 cards and we tell the blade in the machine it's 3 cards, then we're gonna not cut all the way through. I also recommend you're gonna pick it up, you're gonna look at it and make sure it looks flat on all sides. Don't worry too much about like a little tiny ding here or there. After it dries, you can totally add a little clay and then sand later. Okay, now we're gonna put it on the heating surface. Today we're using the Excalibur, which is 4 trays and is sold by Cool Tools, and it goes up to 165 degrees. You want to be at the max temperature. You do want to preheat it ahead of time. We're going to put it in there for about 5 minutes. Okay, we've had our clay in the dehydrator for about 5 to 10 minutes. You do want to preheat it. And what we've done is we put it on the bottom shelf. We've moved it to the bottom shelf because it's a little bit hotter, and the hotter the better. And you'll see what happens with the clay is it curves a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it back on my tile. And with this clay, a lot of clays, if you pushed it down when it was like this, it would break. And so you just press it down gently. We're going to turn it over and we're going to give it about a minute or 2 at the top. Then we're going to turn it back over and leave it in there about 15-20 minutes. Your clay needs to be totally dry. If your clay is not totally dry, you'll have a problem in the curio. So err on the side of over drying it. You cannot over dry it. So we're going to put it back in and take it out and we'll be ready to do a project. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and roll this bezel piece. And we're going to make it nice and thin. And Cool Tools has been kind enough to make a 1.5 card bezel piece. And paper types are all 1 card or 1/2 card. And this is a more appropriate thickness for doing bezels. This is what a metal worker would use. Most of the fine silver bezel wire is about 1.5 cards, pretty close. So we're going to go ahead and roll this. I've marked down how long I need it to be because it's a little trickier to do a longer piece. So I'm going to be holding my ruler up to it. I don't think this one is going to need much conditioning. I do almost always condition my clay. So in this case, because we're going to be long and thin, I'm going to make it a little tube. I am going to still compress to make sure there's no folds in there. And then I'm going to put a little oil on the mat. Again, you never want to squirt oil on here. Your clay is perfectly formulated to do what it needs to do. You don't want to add a lot of oil to it. But I think to roll, you do need a little bit. We're going to go like that. And then I'm going to put a little bit of the extra roll from my hand onto the roller. And And then we are going to roll it out. I'm going to go a little bit the other direction. And I'm trying to stay straight. I'm going to have enough rolled out, I think, for my measurement. And if you have a really, really big stone, you can go sideways. So keep that in mind. Okay, at this point, I'm going to need to cut off the extra. I'm going to make sure I've got 105 millimeters, so I'm going to go to the millimeter side of this ruler. And 105 is about there, so I know how much I can cut off. I'm actually going to cut this little bit off where it folded. I'm going to remove the frame for a minute to do that. And I have a few students who don't like perfectly square edges. I'm not terribly spatial, and it's very helpful to have square edges. I'm going to put this in a hydrator to keep it nice and smooth. Then remember, once we've got it cut, we always want to go back and re-roll a little bit. Especially the thinner the clay, the more you want to do that, because the thin clay, it's really hard to roll 1.5 cards. So I'm going to really give this a lot of pressure with my hands. Oops. And it's stretched out quite a bit. I actually, even still to this day, roll my clay a little bit too thick sometimes. And so especially when it's thin, I'm really careful to get it as rolled out as possible. And I do want to go in both directions. And if the bezel's 2 cards, that's no big deal. You just need to know. You see it stretched out here and stretched out here. So in order to get a nice even thickness, so your blade's going to cut a beautiful even bezel, you want to make sure you've done that rolling. I often make enough of this 1.5 cards to do 2 bezels. And we're ready to go. And we're going to dry this just like we dried the other one. And then we're going to cut it and make a beautiful bezel.
Visit our Learning Center at cooltools.us for more cool jewelry making videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and be sure to sign up for our email list to be the first to hear about new videos, new products, and other cool stuff from Cool Tools.